afternoon again, everybody. We'll start with our committee updates as usual. Committee was that last week? Calendar? Well, it had to be because we're meeting weekly now, so we're doing committee updates. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
We just talked through trying to wrap up 27 calendar. And I think it had come up actually when we were talking about the 25-26 calendar, those PD days in September, the half day on the Friday, and then the following Tuesday that we've had. So we wanted to take a look at those for a couple of reasons. One, based on the feedback from District Dialogue, the half days, which Angie, maybe you can speak to that a little bit. And I'll get some background just on that Tuesday professional day. It used to be later in September. And when I went back and looked at past calendars, I think it was 22-23 was the first year that it got moved up to right after Labor Day. And originally the reason for moving that was, especially with ELL, some of the student count and funding issues. If you have professional development day and a count week, even if it's not on the count day, if it's during that week, it affects some things. And Mike Blinthrop had actually brought that up back then as being an issue if we don't have school and kids in school during count weeks. So we looked at moving that back that Tuesday back later into September too. So I think there was outside the count week, I don't remember the exact date, but it would be like the third week, I think, in September.
Yeah.
The 8th.
I think the 20th was on a weekend.
Yeah, it was on the Saturday or Sunday. So then count day would be the following week. So I think it was the 18th. Is that a Friday in that year? Yeah, the 18th, I think is what we looked at.
Yeah. Yeah, but the committee was supportive of turning that half day before Labor Day, that Friday half day, into a full day of student contact time. Just based on the feedback from everybody on the dialogues as well as community. And then I think we may have to dig a little bit more to see. I think we got an email about potentially an issue on, I think Shelley maybe emailed.
Yes.
There might be an issue with moving the PD day following Labor Day back. So we'll have to have more conversation about that. Definitely not ideal to have that PD day so close to pre-service. But we also don't want to move it so far back and impacts funding. So.
Yeah, because her concern was she's going to pull some data about how many students we typically enroll the day before count day. If we don't have school that Friday before the Monday of count day, because they have to, I'm guessing if we already enrolled, they can't show up on count day, and because that's enrollment day, I bet probably don't want anyone to count. So if that's the case, we may have to look. Problem is, you move it too much later in September, it's getting pretty close to those October parent-teacher conference dates too.
Yeah. So, we're slowly, I think, making some progress on responding to the feedback that we're getting. Calendar, it's just tough since we approved calendars so far out. It's hard to be super responsive in a timely manner. But we can make updates as we're learning this year.
I think that's kind of the last thing hanging out there.
Yeah. And we meet again here, I think it was 4/22.
Yeah, it was the day before.
Yeah, so we'll hopefully wrap things up so we can bring you all the 26-27 calendar.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, we had a few items that we might be getting close to putting them in the draft consensus folder, but we wanted to kind of touch base on those. We had a Something we talked about with elementary plan time on the kindergarten enrollment, and there was another kind of adjustment I wanted to chat with you all about. But anything else on the drug-free schools and non-resident student enrollment policy, I think on our end, we were good with that. Yeah. And then, oh yeah. Here is the kindergarten enrollment language again, and then we talk a little bit about early childhood plan time, and there was one more suggestion that I got. Chat with you.
Oh, yes, and that statement right above.
Yeah. So this is coming around as well, but this kind of as a reminder on kindergarten enrollment, our goal was to codify the existing practice. One thing that has popped up just as I have conversations with some of our elementary staff about kindergarten enrollment would be, we do have some other staff that supports that. Counselors in some elementary buildings are also supporting that. So that's something I think we may have future conversations about. It looks like that is dealt with differently at every building. But that is, I had some counselors kind of reach out and say, okay, so would this language apply to us? Or would we be stipended for it? Or does this count as one of our two, outside of the contract day additional duties? And I think right now it makes sense to leave with what we have and then just make sure counselors are aware that like here are the opportunities that you would have either as one of your additional duties or it's a stipended amount. But I just wanted to mention that was something that I had a couple counselors reach to me about. And then the only other thing is, I know Clint, when you and I had talked about the 300 minutes of plan time for early childhood, we had talked about just removing the student contact part, because that would make more sense since there isn't a 5-day week for early childhood. The other suggestion that I received from the early childhood educators is they wanted an acknowledgement that their plan time is generally on Fridays because it's generally on Fridays. So I just wanted to see if you all would be open to adding that phrase. And that's something Clint, I don't think we talked about on the phone. Just to try to have the contract reflect practice.
They want to generally on Friday. I know that's when the bulk of those events come.
Mm-hmm. Just so it reflects it, so it just reflects practice.
I know, I'm kind of struggling, I don't want them to ever get caught up with well, we didn't have school on Friday, so I didn't get my plan time, and do you feel like
yeah, so I mean, yeah, so
Okay.
I was able to speak with Kim Hawkins. It was really helpful because she has a spreadsheet, and any early childhood educator in the bargaining unit who wants to see their spreadsheet for this, they just ask him and she will provide it. Because there are weeks we don't have school on Friday, and that is not great. In particular times of the year, like we have conferences, that can be a little troublesome. Sometimes during those, for example, conferences, when the rest of us have a half day of school, there is no early childhood when they're half days.
Right.
So that creates time for plan time there. But she has the whole year, including the inclement weather days, where she looks at how many minutes per week they have. And while it isn't necessarily minimum 300 minutes every single week, if you look at an average by semester, it's actually over 300 minutes a week. So that has been a question for sure, because of our schedule. But seeing that spreadsheet was really helpful, and I'm hoping that early childhood educators that are curious about that will just ask, because she's kept really good notes on that.
Yeah, the spreadsheet in conjunction with generally.
I think that's what we're hoping to kind of make things as clear and transparent as we can, and acknowledge that the way that they get their plan time is different. And that's okay, but we just want to make sure that nobody feels like something's being hidden,
Right.
right? That it's just, this is what it is. Yeah, and there are pros and cons, for sure.
Yeah, I would be fine, yeah. I
Mhm.
think it's-
Yeah, I just want to make sure Jenna on Friday didn't know.
I know, I was like,
Yeah,
like,
I kinda-
generally,
Without it, it doesn't change.
no, not necessarily. The feedback that I get from the early childhood educators is in any of our job categories that don't fit the typical box really want to make sure that as when possible, that their reality is reflected in the contract. You know, just like our students want to feel like they're seen and heard. That's kind of what I'm hearing from elementary, or excuse me, from early childhood is, can our reality be reflected in here? Not as a way to catch anybody on anything, but just to say that this does apply to us. So.
and my only other thing, or when students aren't present, would be my only. Or, but I think generally on Fridays, that's their life.
Yeah. And if you all need some time, we can come back to it as well.
We're good.
Yeah. When I talked to Kim about, hey, do you think that would be a problem? She seemed to, well, it is generally on Fridays. It's rarely not on Fridays, so. All right, so we got readings there, and then the 25-26 revised calendar, I think we had already agreed on that one, but I just thought I would put it in the list to make sure that we had kind of an ongoing list. Okay. All right. So we've got some proposals. Let me get the clicker.
All right, so we're gonna begin our proposal language, just kind of highlighting the importance of plan time. You all know this, but it is something that greatly in our surveys reduces teacher burnout, just having that kind of protected time during the day. Therefore improving and maintaining retention of our great staff. The current language in our negotiated agreement is worded so that it applies to all educators, but there are some specifications that seem just applicable to classroom teachers. So on our next slide, we have some red line proposal language to kind of make that a little bit more inclusive of all of the non-negotiables that our teachers have to do, generally accomplish during their plan time. And I know you all can read, but I am going to read it just through to see where the red line changes are. I'm going to begin in the second paragraph. Individual plan time is necessary for all educators to fulfill their professional responsibilities, which may include instructional planning and preparation, evaluating student work or progress, documenting services, developing materials or resources, maintaining communications with families and other educators, and completing job-specific professional duties. Kind of note from us there, that includes kind of some of our support staff that is doing Medicaid building and things like that, just kind of referencing more than it is just lesson planning. Skipping down to the nature of these activities may vary based on the educator's role. It is recognized that on occasion, administrative meetings may occur during individual plan time, which is the exception and not the rule. Non-classroom educators will have an individual plan time commensurate with this policy in varied increments for the purpose of completing the responsibilities of their position. So just a little bit, not necessarily broader, but a little bit more inclusive to make sure that all of our educators of classroom and otherwise are making sure that that time is protected for them to accomplish their necessary duties for their job. And it should be noted, the remainder of that policy, as you guys can see, there is no red line. There's no changes to that.
Not in this.
Not in this part, sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's kind of like the early childhood conversation as I've talked to different job categories. counselors or OTs or, you know, anybody that doesn't have traditional classroom environment. Just feeling like all the examples that were given were like a traditional classroom teacher. And just to think, no, you're in here too. You know, that this is your contract as well.
Any thought to, just because obviously that probably isn't all inclusive for this,
Sure.
where it says to fulfill the professional responsibilities, which may include, do you put not limited to or something like that? That way, if there's other things you start thinking of or haven't put down there, it allows a little bit more general.
I like that.
Yeah. Any other questions or noticings?
You guys would be open to not limited to.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, the intent is that we update it to be more inclusive and then don't have to update it every year. 'Cause
Yeah.
something else pops up.
That would help with.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Our next one.
With that, in that same policy, we'd like to look at the next paragraph, and I think we've got, our red line version coming around right now. We feel like we've made really great progress attending to the needs of educators in terms of plan time. But another point of tension is that duty-free lunch and just making sure that educators receive their plan time and they also have that duty-free lunch. And unfortunately, both of those are compromised on occasion and due to extenuating, many times student circumstances. You've got, need to deal with the de-escalation, a student needs a safe place, that kind of thing. So we did a survey, and the data from our most recent survey shows that since we've adopted language to allow educators to get paid for their lost plan or their lunchtime, special education staff specifically are still losing that time on occasion. And it's not a building level issue. It has spread to a majority of our buildings. Last year at elementary early childhood, we were at 76% of those staff that missed one of those times. And this year we're at 82. So, and we've increased at middle and high as well. So, and please note that this data right here just reflects special education. So there are other educators that are impacted as well. And I'm going to go on to the next one. I'll do this one. That's okay. This slide breaks down missed lunch and missed plan time for all of our different levels. And then we've done a little math and just kind of added that up for the year. So that's what all of the 4 places in each of those sections represents. And it looks like across the board that when we adopted that the missed lunch or plan time, when we adopted payment for that, that we've had some overall decreases, but we're still seeing increases in a couple different areas. So missed plan time in elementary, and then lunch and plan time in high school has increased since last year. So those numbers are still increasing a little bit. So we can go on to the next slide. Okay. And this slide represents just people who attempted to get reimbursement for that missed plan time or that missed lunch time. And it looks like almost 60% have reported that they had no problems with that system. So we have around 40% of our staff who still are not accessing that reimbursement of that compensation. And so our goal is to simplify that process. You'll notice that the top portion of that graph are reasons that they were not able to be compensated. And then the bottom just lists reasons that they, when they did apply for that compensation, if that makes sense. So we have a lot of reasons why we didn't apply for compensation. And then we had a good amount of success, but we still have some denials and that kind of thing. So we'd like to make the process more streamlined, if that makes sense. So we'd like to propose changing the language just slightly, and I'm going to read through this as well. I'm going to start with that second sentence because that's what we're changing. On occasions not already addressed in the agreement, please note that we took out the word rare. We feel like this is more than a rare occasion situation. When extraordinary and unscheduled student or building needs cause an educator to lose their negotiated plan time and or duty-free lunch, they will be compensated using the rate and process specified under policy GEF. So we took out that word rare and we changed a couple of the other words that we felt were more active in terms of the educator making that choice. Sometimes it's the educator's just in a position where they need to fill in, right? And the administrator's not there to get approval, that kind of thing. So we feel that this language reflects the reality that extraordinary and unscheduled student or building needs are happening in schools more than rarely. And it, like I said, it's impractical to get an administrator every single time because of the nature of these unscheduled student or building needs. Special education has come up with a document. One ONEA member came up with a document that outlines a plan for this compensation to occur, this kind of a list, I guess, of what steps should we go through before that educator loses that plan time or loses that lunch time. And it seems like it's helpful at the elementary level, but we don't have a process in place for middle and high school. So that's where we are with that.
That helps answer my question about the administrator or designee. Why they're taking that out. The other thing, I guess, is there, not that this would ever happen, but obviously if they're being compensated for it, if it were to become very often that they're quote stepping in for something, how would that, I mean, I guess it would just be a conversation amongst the building principal and the staff member.
I would think so. Sounds like more communication needs to happen across the board.
Right.
So
I think that it's the pre-approval that's
Right.
sort of the sticking point right now. There's a child in front of me having an emotional crisis. Please hold your crisis while I call my administrator, right? That's not
Right. Yeah, totally get that. Time for that.
And I think like this policy, you know, we did suggest this policy or propose this policy for last school year. Yeah, the timeline, right? Because of SPED, but this isn't just impacting SPED educators. And that's why I think the document that I think has been helpful at the elementary level, it is pretty specific to, I mean, it was designed for elementary with SPED in mind. Just trying to think about how to make that process work in all of our buildings and all of our job categories. Seems like quite a task.
Just last year we put that statement in.
I think it was, because I did a little star. Yeah, 23-24 is when we started it. Yeah. And we definitely saw that the policy helped. We're just not there.
Is this to say, this is loser negotiated plan time or pretty much the entire block? Or picture a teacher passing classroom. Grass, bring to the office.
Yeah, the policy GBZEF, which you will see here soon, doesn't really outline a way to pay somebody for 2 or 3 minutes. At the secondary, it uses terms like half a block for like block days, or like, you know, an hour or a half an hour, but it doesn't have anything for, you know, 2 or 3 minutes. This would be, you know, it's taking up a significant portion. Yeah. Yeah, I think at that point, if, you know, if somebody was facing an issue with the student that maybe was taking up 10, 15 minutes of their lunch, because maybe they had the end of that hour, and then I think that would probably prompt a conversation with the principal about like how, you know, last week I lost 15 minutes of 3 lunch periods, you know. I think ultimately we want more communication to happen overall. But there's not like an easy way where somebody can just say, I lost 2 minutes, let's put that in. Yeah, and that would not be great for just our processes anyways.
Yeah, you said, increase communication a little bit. And it's not time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the reality is our educators are busy enough that losing 2 or 3 minutes is not worth doing the paperwork for it anyways. So I think just the process itself, I think will address that, but.
And honestly, that's just the nature of education.
That, yeah,
So,
yeah.
3 minutes.
The intent of this was like
that.
the larger chunks.
Yeah, I think the policy, the minimum of a half hour.
Yeah. This much conversation.
I think it's communication and awareness too, just so that educators know and.
There we go. Yeah.
So this is actually within that policy GBZEF. One small change that we are proposing is to adjust those rates of pay slightly. The last time those numbers were touched was the 2017-2018 school year. So we basically looked at those numbers and the rate of inflation since that time period. And it comes to roughly turning 30 an hour into 40 an hour on the coverage piece. And then changing the combined classes rather than being on a per day rate, making it per hour to reflect that different days are sometimes substantially different in length. How that works at different levels or different buildings.
Yeah, some of the feedback that we received on combining classes, I mean, obviously, best case scenario, if you're taking a whole class and having to split it up, if there are 2 classrooms to split those students into rather than 1, I mean, that's best case scenario. Our goal there was trying to make that more equitable. So let's say that class is being split among 2 classes versus 3. Having 150 per day means that you have additional students, but because it's split among 3, it's less. Doesn't necessarily mean it's less work, because you still have additional students in your room. But the intent there is to have the rate, the rate per hour. Okay, hold on. We wanted to keep it consistent to $40 an hour, but have that, I'll say it right, have it being split among the individuals that are being impacted. So strike what I said earlier, and I'll say it right. The $40 would still be distributed, but it would be by hour instead of day. Get that correct.
I have a quick question. How is this? If I wanted to figure out, what did we spend on this last year as a teacher?
Secretaries will email Shelley Baldwin and just let them know like, hey, I have the 2
Shelley.
teachers that would
She's probably,
need coverage or that are getting paid coverage for class. I'm not saying that right, but yeah. It's like, it is a stipend, but we have to go through Shelley.
To your point, I think coming up with a precise cost on this is challenging.
Well, and even looking at like, if I combined a class for $150 and I took away my plan time and I took away lunch, I would be making $260 versus $150. If I did $40 an hour, about, right? Is that kind of what you're, yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Or keep tracking it, or I don't know how it gets plugged in. So,
And it doesn't happen. It happens.
but it's-
Increases. Huge. So I didn't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes we can balance it out with somebody covering for an hour here or an hour there, like a specialist, but that gets pretty tricky. And there's just times that you just have to combine because there's no other way. So instead of 20 kids, you have 40 kids in a class.
Right.
If you only have 2 sections. If you have more than one section, you can have 10.
Well, that was some more discussion about why you still wanted to split, particularly at the elementary level, so that you didn't have a weird situation where like the financial incentive is to put kids in a position that's not
Not
the
safe.
most safe or
Yeah.
for them.
Yeah.
John was.
Yeah, so
Just
the-
curious.
There's a lot of our specialists are teaching more students and more lessons throughout the day and the year. I think there maybe happened, the combining classes may have happened a little bit more first semester this year than maybe in previous years. Because the specialists could be pulled for subbing a little bit more. So that's, I think, kind of why it popped on our radar. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I also think it recognizes just how much more weight that puts on an educator's shoulders. I'm now getting these students, but I don't have any papers copied for them, or their teacher was on a different step of the lesson than me. Especially as a classroom teacher, it's very difficult in the moment of all these children are now yours, and you're trying to like stay on task with your kids, but maybe your next door neighbor was in a different place. So I think it also just recognizes the weight of that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, because we were talking about, in developing this, we're talking about trying to make it to where it would, things would fluctuate based on how many times that split up. And then we ended up not doing that because it just got like unmanageable. So that's why we kept the maximum and then the language about distributed among several individuals. Because we have to have, we need to have something that is actually doable.
Sure.
So I guess I'm just curious. So $40 an hour, let's say I split it up into 2 classes, each teacher would get $20 an hour. Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
Okay.
that's, we went ahead and kept that language,
Okay.
even though we did talk, and that's why I misspoke earlier, we did talk about the reality is that, I think I had a specialist that had like 60 first graders in a class at one point this year. Obviously, it was not an optimal day. So like that amount is extra work, but we just couldn't figure out language that was an extenuating, very rare circumstance. Obviously, but we just couldn't figure out language that would be workable for that. So this is kind of what we landed on, as something we thought that would acknowledge that extra work, as well as it being in line with the rate of pay for coverage, even though they are different, they're different types of stress.
Anything else on that one?
Next, we are bringing forward more language related to Medicaid billing.
Yeah, my whole point was.
We've had a lot of related service providers kind of reach out and just share information about the time commitment for completing their Medicaid billing. And so we know that it would, the completion of Medicaid billing is a shared interest for both of us, as it provides funding for our services. We gave a reset survey to all of our related service providers, which we had a little over 50% of them respond within a really short amount of time, which was great. But those who completed the report said that they spend between 10 minutes to an hour or more each school day completing their billing, depending on their caseload and students. But we also know that Medicaid billing should be completed by the day of the service. And there are educators reporting to us that the afternoon duty at the end of a school day makes it challenging to be able to complete this within their professional day. One quote from our survey that kind of spoke to us, it said, "No, I don't have time for Medicaid billing built into my day, and it's what makes it difficult to manage because it's supposed to be completed the same day as service. So unless everything is done after hours, it is hard to do within the same day." So the language that we are providing in your red line is just adding a sentence that says educators whose duties include Medicaid billing will be exempted from afternoon duties, so they may work on Medicaid billing at that time. We know that that's not going to cover the entire amount of time that they need for that, but we have at least one building who is functioning in this manner, and we've received positive feedbacks that their RSPs have been extremely thankful that they're being acknowledged that this is an extra task put on to their daily duties.
So truly, the related service providers that do Medicaid billing are OTs, speech and language.
I saw
Gifted, not
some
gifted.
nurse. I thought I saw some nurses. I think in the survey, I could be wrong because I'm going off the top of my head. Not quite sure. I'd have to dig into that a little bit. PTs, it's not all of them. And because they may be serving students that don't qualify for Medicaid. So there would have to be some communication. Obviously there to, oh, this year you have nobody in your caseload for Medicaid building. So, okay, afternoon duty. This year you do have, but we know that when they don't get that Medicaid billed, that doesn't help anybody.
I think this language is just to be helpful in those educators being able to have a conversation with their administrator of what, in order for us to balance things, could I be exempt from dismissal duty? So we felt like adding in this sentence would be beneficial to our educators to feel that we're acknowledging that extra work, and we know that it's not going to solve everything, but it's at least a small step forward.
That's what I was gonna ask, is like, example of the afternoon piece.
Car line, bus, walker, crosswalk.
Not knowing that, well, the elementary rule, I think afternoon, I'm thinking noon on. Right?
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Like three.
That's what, not knowing elementary, I'm thinking. So then I'm
Yeah.
thinking the afternoon.
Yeah, we originally had dismissal duty, and then we started thinking, I guess there could be, because this does pop up mostly in elementary, just because they're smaller. Then we thought, well, there could be maybe another after school duty in a different environment. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but that's why we went with the more vague language. But after school duties would probably, yeah,
That was definitely our intent.
that is the intent. Yeah. Yeah,
Wow, that-
just go home. No, it's not our. Yeah, this is about, yeah,
The Medicaid has to be done the same day.
Never being a principal, is there ever a all hands on deck that we're gonna wipe out because of problem? And I know wherever possible, whenever possible, we create a different.
I will tell you, like, at our OTs, I don't know, there's a full-time OT in the building. I think they're all part-time, like, so I'm looking at speech and language, like our SLPs. Those are our main people, and we use them at times like for dismissal, or we may not use them for arrival, like, so I think there's just that. But yes, sometimes because we're short-staffed. So that, unless there's a,
We generally try to, I mean, pretty strategic way, or we have the conversations with certain teachers or preferences, they all have a chance to provide feedback. And I was trying to think of a situation that one of these positions would prefer the academic for some reason, and is that an issue, but just communications.
Yeah, I mean, if we were to include this language, I don't know if that would stop an educator from volunteering, but the feedback that we've been getting is, especially if our plan time isn't at the end of the day, which saying it's at the end of the day probably create more problems in just making those schedules work, that we thought this would maybe be a more practical solution.
Just for the review. Put that in there, you know what I mean, like a qualifier, or what that is, like.
We could do, will be, yeah, unless, or generally, or, you know, if we could kind of
That's
think
what I was
about,
trying to,
yeah,
I doubt that it's.
I mean-
Very often.
It's like regularly scheduled.
yes.
Yeah, yeah, I like that.
Something like regularly
Yeah.
scheduled, have a certain rate.
Yeah. we ultimately want students to be able to leave
Yeah.
school in a safe manner as well.
Right, but that way they know they're not skipping that way. Just for the flexibility of the administrator too, I don't want them to, something comes up and they do it, and
Feel
oh my
like-
gosh, this.
Yeah.
You know, long as similar or proposal, which
Continuing education.
Those who are not licensed by KSDE, what they need to relicense.
Yeah, so these are educators who invest significant unpaid time and money into gaining these CEUs. In a survey we conducted, we found out that an average of 25 hours per year are spent outside of their contract time gaining these CEUs. And then many spend between 100 all the way up to 400 and maybe even more, depending on the CEU, annually out of their pocket to be able to gain these CEUs, which are required of them for their position. And so a lot of times our district or building learning doesn't serve their professional needs. Many request time that directly supports their license. So maybe sessions that would directly be directly related to a CEU. There have been some suggestions about including like discipline specific PD that could qualify for CEUs. There are online CEU options, or even be given time during the contract day to work on CEUs. Some of these educators feel sometimes excluded from planning and forced to sit through sessions that may not be extremely applicable to their role. And they could use that time otherwise to be working on these CEUs. And there's also just strong requests for more autonomy and flexibility for them to gain the learning and knowledge that they will need to be successful. So on the next slide includes our language for this policy. And a little bit of this had also just some cleanup of language. And so we wanted to replace professional development with professional learning. We then wanted to eliminate the language related to job embedded, since that is no longer our current practice. So just kind of cleaning up some of the language to make it what we are currently doing. And then we wanted to add CEUs to the list of professional learning opportunities, which you will see.
Number 7.
Yes,
Front of the page.
on the front of the page, number 7. Yes, the second, there's number 7 that's in red. And then kind of updating the vision within this policy. And then the biggest part is adding a section which you can find on the back related to CEUs. And I'll read it for you. I know you have it in front of you. In general, educators who use CEUs for relicensure should receive an equitable amount of time to earn CEUs as their colleagues receive to earn professional development points on professional learning and preparation days. While there may be occasions where educators who use CEUs for relicensure need to be included in building or district professional development activities, which do not provide an opportunity for CEUs, while other educators are earning professional development points, this should be the exception and not the rule. Equitable time can be provided by presenting CEU eligible professional learning, or allowing educators who use CEUs for relicensure to pursue external CEUs on professional learning and preparation days. That was a lot of words. But our intent in this is to provide those educators either time on professional development days, whether it's building PD, providing them time to be able to work on their CEUs, as well as words are going to come back to me. They've left my brain.
I think you pretty much covered it.
Oh, and just relating it to educators who do earn our professional development points during our PD, making that more equitable, and that they could also work on the similar thing of the scale.
You guys remind me who are CEUs. I'm thinking nurses.
Nurses, which are very hard to get. CEUs, SLPs,
All the ones are just said, right?
OTs, PTs.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the next piece of paper lists them all. Music therapist, social worker, audiologist. Yeah,
You
it's the next one. Yeah.
And none of these can also use professional development to move along to move column placement, right?
Okay, yeah, so that's a really good question. I did talk to Jenna Cooter a little bit about this. Currently, there is a form on Frontline that an educator who is earning CEUs can fill out to request salary schedule movement points for CEUs. Obviously, that'd be outside the contract day. So in just kind of brainstorming about this policy, I talked to Jenna a little bit, and she said, you know, obviously the CEUs that they would earn during the contract day would not qualify for salary schedule movement. So she talked a little bit about how that form, should this policy move forward, that form could be adjusted in Frontline to where they could click a box to indicate it happened during the school day to kind of help track, you know, I don't want to say attendance, but to track that, if that was something that we're concerned about, and then also acknowledge that we would still want it to be equitable for our educators that don't have CEUs, that they can't earn points during the contract day that would move on salary schedules. We want that equity to kind of go both ways. So I think we have a system that is currently there that we could modify to, and there's something there for accountability as well. Like if that Frontline form went through the principal first, would be an option, or because I think currently they all go directly to, I forgot. They go directly to the person who manages all the salary movement. Yeah, might be, but yeah, so the form might have to, we could talk about that process, but.
Yeah, I think we have a kind of similar process for typical certified educators doing the out of district professional development. And there's different boxes we check. If it's during the school day, we're getting a sub, well, then we can't get point movement for that versus.
So that's one of my questions, is it flexible to where, like, if they're getting, so on professional development day or professional learning day, they're doing their CEUs, is that expected to be on site still, or do they have the option?
We don't have any
offsite?
language right now about it being offsite, because we do, I mean, we want to acknowledge that, you know, for some of our PD days, it's like a half day, so we lose time there, and we do want to kind of keep that equity. One thing we did talk about is a lot of these CEUs are online.
Yes, they are.
But if an educator were to find something that was in person, then I would still think the out of district request would still apply.
Primarily,
Yeah.
the
thought is,
be
yeah.
on site.
Mhm.
I'm just from the equity standpoint too, I'm just
Yeah.
thinking if I'm a teacher in the building, but I probably know this, but never
Right.
seen my SLP or.
Yeah.
Offsite.
Yeah. And we do acknowledge that there is some building PD that is relevant to our
Sure.
RSPs.
Sure.
So this isn't meant to interfere with that, but we also know as much as a principal tries to differentiate, there sometimes is not a way to make a certain topic relevant to these educators. So we just want to make space for that and have a way.
I guess
Yeah.
that brings up another question. So how is that decision made, whether it's applicable enough to them to where then that just made it building level on the PD or?
I think when we were about this, it would be conversation with the building administrator. And then as they're going through the PD or even at their BLT meeting, talking about is this session kind of laying that out.
I just want it to be equitable too, because I'm thinking certain buildings would like, no, I need you, but certain buildings were like, sure, I don't wanna plan, you know, like,
Right.
I'm thinking like half and half almost, like attend half and then you have the rest, like, you know what I'm saying,
Yeah.
just to be more equitable.
Well, and
you know?
and to the piece of equity, because the trouble with equity is you get what you need, not everybody gets the same. And the reality is that there are probably more building level PDs that are relevant to SLPs than to OTs or PTs or perhaps nurses. So to make space for that and like, there's some challenges there, which is why you didn't see any specifics there. But yeah.
Would it help to say, because we're wanting to encourage that conversation between that person and the building administrator, put it, and I don't know where it fits with all that, maybe at the end there, that last sentence, equitable time can be provided by presenting CEU eligible professional learning or allowing educators who use CEUs for licensure to pursue external CEUs on professional learning preparation days with building administrator approval or something like that. Because it doesn't really say how they decide that or how that.
It would also be with the, I think this would be less applicable on district PD days.
Right.
But I think it's possible, depending on which of those job categories you are, like a music therapist, for example, might have similar issues on
I
the
wonder
district
even if
days.
it was district PD, if that can still run.
I see some of that happening already. A lot of times, school nurses, say we're meeting on this day, it's building day. Is this okay with you? And it's always kind of nice to be able to say, well, here's what we're doing, and you know, it's great. Here's what we would want to catch you up on, or is there another option? Because this is what we're doing today. So I feel like I see it kind of already happening a little bit. But would this be more on an individual basis? Is that kind of how?
Yeah, I definitely, I could see, some of our, educators wanting to work together on things and, you know, that would be great, like to do an online CEU, but have somebody to actually talk about with it, you know, whether it's like Zooming or what have you. I think, having that being open, I see it being more of an individual thing, but we didn't put that language in there because we wanted to leave it open to, let's spend 30 minutes going through this module and then let's hop on a Zoom so we can talk about it. Kind of create your own PD. But I think we could definitely look at adding some language about that building admin approval.
Maybe it's, maybe it's spelled out even a little bit too on building professional development day pending building administrator approval, district level PD day. If we want to address that, saying the appropriate district level facilitator or something like that, yeah. And that way, 'cause I can just see if I am an SLP or an OT and I read this as it is, that's great, but like, what's the next step? Like,
Yeah.
how does it get done? How do I get permission to do that? Or how do I line that up?
Yeah.
And I think spelling it out maybe would
Feel
help that.
comfortable doing it.
Right, right.
Right.
Yeah, it really gives them kind of the direction to go if they want to go that route. Of how to make it happen, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can work on some language there.
It's also possible that this language would give some of those district days, it might give some additional directions, not the word I mean, but for some of those days could be sort of district coordinated with more CEUs in mind.
Yeah.
We have them, some of those groups together.
Saying like on district days, could they choose whether they want to do CE? Professional development points? Or
So
no?
my understanding from these job categories is these PD points that just during the day, they mean nothing to them because they can't do anything with them.
They don't recertify.
Yeah.
Right. So this is just trying to highlight that they can get CEUs instead. Yeah. But I acknowledge in frontline, they're having a way to track that might be helpful. So.
And you said you talked to Jen about before that PD, or maybe did you have any discussion with her on this? Did she have any thoughts?
Yeah, she gave us some suggestions on, especially some of the updates that you see. Oh,
Okay.
for Medicaid billing or?
Well,
for
no,
the-
for the CEUs, and like, how, did she have any thoughts on, like, since district-wide PD, I'm speaking more to, since that's what she works with, did she have issues with that, I guess, or thoughts on that, or?
Yeah, no, we didn't go into the weeds too much with that. I think, the smaller the group, the bigger this is an issue in general, like the SLPs, for example, that's a pretty large group. The district days overall, probably more relevant than maybe like music therapists. We have a very small group. It's not like we have a facilitator that just does music therapy.
Right.
We want to leave space for that. The bigger the group in general, the more relevant the PD, just because of the nature of how it's organized. And we also wanted to acknowledge, because I mean, ultimately what this job category wants is they want CEUs, and they would love in-person CEUs because we all know that's best. But the reality is it's much harder to get CEUs for nurses. So to have language that says, you know, the district provided PD should qualify for CEUs is just not practical, even though that's really what they want. So there might be some opportunities at some point to work with our surrounding districts, but then our PD days don't align. So that's kind of some of the issues we waded through to get to this point. Okay.
Continuing kind of on the trend, wanted to kind of reimburse. An update reimbursement request form for KSDE license renewal to include reimbursement for costs associated with earning CEUs up to $500 per year.
I know. Yeah, no, I mean, I think we really explore the idea of a CEU stipend instead of this. And the feedback that we got from that was really that we wanted more emphasis on being able to have more flexibility of time for professional development to earn those CEUs. And of course, when you're talking about a CEU stipend, then you're talking about something that's going to ding you on taxes. And some job categories have lots of free CEUs. So we thought rather than having just like, here's a stipend that's going to ding you on your taxes, that maybe have a reimbursement, since we already have a process for reimbursement of licensure costs, that maybe adding the CEU up to a certain point for reimbursement would be a more attractive offer, both in just the practicality of it and quite frankly, costs, is to pay somebody a CEU stipend when they are getting all their CEUs for free. there's a little bit of inequity there just because not all CEUs are as easy or the same price. I mean, I saw on that document on the survey, we had, I can't remember what job category it was, but somebody was spending like nearly $1,000 a year on CEUs. And perhaps that would be, you know, an outlier. That's why we put an upper limit on it. But it's just so different based on each job category.
I do remember the IRS. one.
Yeah, that's why
Maintain versus.
that's why I was hoping.
Another job, so
Yeah.
that works.
Okay.
So,
And I think this is also kind of helping to acknowledge that all of us who are not in this category get our PD points through our district PD. Like I can relicense with all of my Olathe Public Schools PD points and it's provided for me. And so recognizing that for them, they're having these additional costs kind of for what would be the compared.
For the amount, I know you mentioned somebody had given me $1,000 a year. Was there, just look at a list or how'd you come up with 500, I guess?
We had about 100 of these individuals fill out a survey and like it was a quick turnaround. I was surprised we got over 50%. So that speaks to the passion with which they're feeling this. And we just asked, you know, on average, you know, per year, how many hours do you spend outside of the contract day? How much money do you spend? And there was quite a bit of variety by job category as well as by person.
The average was more so between like 1 to 400 with obviously outliers. But this could potentially allow, maybe there's someone there's a CEU that would be extremely helpful for them, but maybe it was a little more expensive than what their budget can allow them. And so maybe providing something like this would also allow those educators to really pick and choose what works best for them and not necessarily have the cost be the primary dictation of the CEU that they choose.
Hey, Jack and Chip, did you say, when you said, 100 responses, that's 50%, there's about 200?
About 200.
Yeah, I think like 222.
Yeah.
And so we had a little over 100 respondents.
Yeah, in like 4 days. Yeah, I mean, it was very clear that they were, and I got quite a few emails like, thank you for asking. We've been waiting to be asked this. So I think that this would go a long way in practical ways, but this would go a long way in other ways and just showing value.
And just anecdotal feedback that we had in conversations, they were just so thankful that we were even talking about it and acknowledging that their world is a little bit different. And so I think any step forward that we can come to together, they would be so extremely thankful. And that could definitely be a piece that could help retain someone of adding that extra acknowledgement for their work.
Do you know if
So Blue Valley is where I opt to get told to look at as like the standard, because they have a separate bargaining unit for RSPs. And so when we looked into what they did, they have a CEU stipend. So that's kind of where we thought, honestly, I thought that's kind of where we were going to go. And then once we talked to our people, they, you know, not that they're against the CEU stipend, but yeah, but it avoids taxes. And I think really we heard we want to earn these during our contract day instead of sitting through PD or feeling like, oh, you can go work on something. Like they want professional learning too. Don't get me wrong, they'd rather go back to their office and work on stuff and sit through a session, but to have this in the contract to allow that to happen in a more formal way.
Yeah, and I think if I'm remembering correctly, and I have taught a whole day of school and many days in between then and now, the Blue Valley stipend for this just recently was added to their agreement, I think this past year, and it was a $1,200 stipend.
For most areas, I think there were BCBA's stipend was more, but we don't, yeah, 1250, yeah. No. Just got one more kind of small thing, and I didn't print this, which now I'm realizing is funny since it's so small, but yeah.
So this is page 60, right?
Yep,
That's that little number down there.
yep,
Page 60 of the agreement where it kind of talks about, at the top, it says the other district stipends, and then at the very bottom, it's talking about those reimbursements. And so we are looking at that kind of red box that is the speech language pathologist certificate of clinical competence, the CCC. So we have this reference for their certificate, and this, we identified that this would need to be updated to reflect current practice or any proposal that would be ratified by the bargaining unit for the next contract. So this could be language that we could work on, or this could be language that the language committee could work on if.
yeah. I think maybe this started with just SLPs. And then it was broadened, but the page 60 never got updated. If that makes sense.
So this is more so just putting on our radar, something that we will need to work on depending on what happens.
So maybe there's a reason to keep it, but because, I mean, the form says that they'll be reimbursed full cost of the license. And that just addresses speech.
And I don't think
here.
the price there is the actual cost of the
Correct.
license,
And
so,
we're worrying about updating the price.
Yeah.
Every year, or anything to just eliminate that since it's already addressed on the form.
we might want to have it listed there just as reimbursement for a non-KSDE license, just to make it general.
And
Yeah.
reference it.
Yeah,
Maybe.
see page, yeah, but it's way too specific
Yeah.
right now. Because I've had people say, well, it's unfair that SLPs get reimbursed,
Right.
but OTs don't. I'm like, well, actually, you do. This just doesn't show that.
Right.
So it's kind of confusing.
Well, the more things we can, that have to be updated, especially when we're not changing that cost,
Yes,
right? It's the state or whatever
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
sets the price of that license.
yeah, absolutely.
So do you guys want to bring back some?
Yeah, no, we can do
language
that.
Or, I guess, because if we eliminate that, like you said, we would just need to add something to say,
Just,
refer to this form.
perfect. And I think especially like the cost, and then it says like the specific name of the certificate, but it might be a different name of the
Yeah.
certificate.
Right.
Yeah.
Just make it very general, C page or C appendix, what have you.
Yeah, 'cause the wording in on the form is even fairly, district
Yeah.
reimburse educators for the cost of that license.
Yeah.
Doesn't say a specific name of the certificate, right?
Any other questions on that? I know we just went through a lot, so I just wanted to kind of highlight, we went through a lot of policy, but we were trying to front load this so we can, get into money stuff a little bit more later, but we talked about revisions of the description of plan time, a revision to the language on missing lunch and plan for those unscheduled things. We talked about educator paid coverage rates, protected Medicaid billing time, and then the last piece that was a little detailed there was the CEU professional learning and then the reimbursement process. And then, of course, we have these policies that we have previously talked about, and maybe got a couple of them in the RAC consensus today, so. That is good for us.
But the little bunch was non-existent again, so. Try to get that down.
Yeah,
by the
no,
end
you're
of the
good.
year. I asked employee services to pull some information, and honestly, it's kind of last minute, so I can clean this up a little bit, but they had to have a front line, they just had a report written that can separate out the PD points versus credit hours. So I had them do the last 3 years just for reference, and as I said, I apologize. I didn't have time to do the math, but Eric, you'll quickly notice it's about 13%. It seems like for these 3 years at least, that PD points are used for movement versus a more traditional credit hour. Also, just pulled the history that they have kept on column movement all the way back to 2015, just to kind of see how much money are we talking about. The reason I separated it out that bottom is I never really gave it much thought. They need to audit these 3 years because they assume you're just one FTE, and the other years they have adjusted and said, okay, it usually kind of comes out in the wash, but they do go through the exercise. Your halftime, you have extra days, and just get it more refined. It's in the ballpark, but as you see, we had a significant decrease last year. The only reason, not the only, the reason it's on the letter and I noticed is in case we want to talk about it as a source of revenue, as we talk about compensation down the road here. We don't have a policy to really present. It's just one of those items that had we not noticed it, we couldn't even talk about it. If that's an avenue we want to go, and I just looked at, as I mentioned last week, some of the things that we may be different from other districts, and just the ability to talk about them. Otherwise, we couldn't talk about them. So I opted more for just a data dump today to at least frame how much money's involved in that.
I would have predicted a lot more.
I would have too, Eric, to be honest with you.
I wonder if, because of the increased sped funding last year, I wonder if people felt less pressure because they knew there was a little more of a bump last year in compensation than we had.
Well, I'm not looking down
Yeah.
here as much, because I think some of this is due to, when we adopted the new salary schedule, one of the things that changed in that is, of course, how much a column
Oh,
gives you.
okay.
I'm talking up here, the difference between college credits versus
I
the,
think it's more I think it's more decades back. It's much easier to get credit online now.
that's
When
true.
we designed this whole point system, it was you had to drive down to Baker and sit in the chair. And I'm sure the district felt we could give valuable PD and it's worth movement. I think more and more people are just opting to do some other avenue that wasn't available 15, 20 years ago. But I would have said it's 40%. I don't know why. I just thought that it's.
I would have predicted real low.
So at least these recent 3 years, it's been fairly low. So that math on those 3 years, I think, is about $300,000 to $350,000 a year. A lot of administration for it. I think Jenna does a lot of work to track all
Yeah.
those things, but if that's not the flavor of choice, then it's more online coursework. Maybe it's something that is reallocated in the compensation model, but nothing to propose tonight. Just that's the quantification of it.
Any other questions or anything else? Julia, did you have a question about, the budget presentation?
Yes. So thank you. My dollar signs were replaced by actual numbers. There was a figure in the slides last week about the cost of a 1% increase for non-bargaining unit employees. I can't remember exactly how it was stated. Was that just for classified staff or did that include administration as well?
It's actually classified administration and extracurriculars. It's the non-salary schedule.
Okay.
Okay.
I know the extracurriculars are tied to the salary schedule, but it was just everything off of that chart.
Gonna be back here in what, 8 days? Is that how math works? So we got a little more than a week. Will we will survive? Yes. I don't know what you're gonna do with all that extra time the next 8 days.